Well, hello to my Sunday school friends. It is really nice to see you. I hope you're well. I hope you're healthy and your family as well, and that you are enjoying your summer. We have been talking about King Solomon. We talked about how he became king after King David first decided he would be king and then died. We talked about how Solomon asked God for wisdom, and God granted that. And last week we talked about how Solomon finally built a temple for the Lord, just like the tabernacle, but made out of stone and wood. It took 7 years. It was beautiful, and how God filled that temple with his presence. And then God made a promise to Solomon that if you do what you're supposed to do, if you keep my laws, you and your children will continue to be the kings of Israel. But if you forget, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, I can take it all away from you too. So Solomon, for a long time, did really well. He was very wise. He wrote wise sayings and poems that people loved. People all over that part of the world heard about Solomon's wisdom, about his wealth, about his abilities, about how he lived and how God had blessed him. And everyone near and far was impressed with Solomon. Now, there was a queen in Sheba. Sheba is in northern Africa, who heard these things about Solomon and was not quite sure that they were all true. So she packed up a big caravan. She brought lots of gifts, gold and gems, and she came to visit Solomon. And she asked him many riddles, and he was able to answer all of the riddles. She asked him many difficult questions about many different subjects, and he was able to explain all kinds of things to her. She watched how he carried himself. She watched how his servants acted. She watched the wealth that surrounded this kingdom and how Solomon went to the temple and prayed to God and offered burnt sacrifices. And she said to Solomon, I didn't believe everything I heard, and it turns out that I knew less than half of what is true. God has blessed you amazingly. How happy your wives must be. How happy your servants must be. How great is the God that's given you this wisdom and this prosperity. Prosperity is a fancy word for having everything you need, for wealth, but not just wealth, also peace and happiness. That God has given you this prosperity. It's an amazing thing that God has done for you. And she gave Solomon beautiful gifts. She gave him gold, 120 talents of gold. Remember, a talent is a weight. For your purposes, you know how mom or dad have laundry baskets in the laundry room that the laundry sits in before it goes in the machine? Yeah, 120 laundry baskets full of gold, plus precious stones and really beautiful wood that Solomon was able to use in the temple and in his palace and to make musical instruments. Spices, more spices than had ever come into Israel. And she just poured these gifts on Solomon because she was so amazed at his wisdom, so amazed at God's grace and God's power and God's blessings. And Solomon returned the favor. He gave her gifts, rich gifts, gold and things that he'd received from the bounty, the fruitfulness of Israel. So, did the gifts balance out? Probably they balanced out. Probably she went home with just about what she came with, and he had just about what he had before she came. But both of them poured themselves out, being generous to one another. It was a wonderful time in Israel. Solomon was living into the fullness of what God had promised. He was enjoying all the blessings that keeping God's will brings to a person, especially to a king, and God was being faithful. And God is always faithful. We'll pause here for tonight, for today, but you need to remember that God's faithful to you too, that God has made promises to you too, to love you, to protect you, to forgive your sins, to help you to become more and more like Jesus. And God calls you and me to work to do the things that God asks us to do. So you and I, we're going to work at being people of prayer. We're going to work at honoring God and keeping God's laws. We're going to ask God for forgiveness when we mess up, and we're going to forgive the people around us. This is the stuff that Jesus commands us to do. This is God's will. You take care. I'll talk to you again next week more about Solomon. Bye-bye.